The Senate spent the morning debating the immigration bill and rejected a Republican attempt to require the U.S.-Mexico border to be under control for 6 months before immigrants here illegally could take the first steps toward citizenship. Turning now to live coverage of the Senate floor here on C-SPAN 2.
Madam President,
Senator from Connecticut.
I ask that the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection. Oh, we're not in quorum call.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. Today we mark a 6-month anniversary of a date that none of us will ever forget because it transformed our lives, it transformed America, it certainly transformed Connecticut and the community of Newtown. We commemorate the 6-month anniversary of that unspeakable, unimaginable tragedy that cut short the lives of 20 beautiful, innocent children and 6 dedicated, courageous educators. It transformed America in so many ways, changed our lives irrevocably, and put us on a trajectory, I hope, toward changes in our laws that will prevent this kind of horrific, unimaginable tragedy from ever happening again. And our challenge right here in this body, on this floor, is to make sure that we learn from it, that we act on it, that we keep faith with those families, as well as the Newtown community and all of our country that lost so much in that day. December 14th began like so many other days for the parents of Newtown, Connecticut. They took their children to school, kissed them goodbye, and went about their day with plans for play dates and Hanukkah and Christmas and holiday parties, presents that they would give to those children for those holidays. They planned snack breaks and holiday parties. They wrapped those presents. And just hours later, I stood with them, saw them emerge from the Sandy Hook firehouse, having learned that those children would not be coming home that night. I arrived in Newtown as a public official within hours of that shooting. But what I saw was through the eyes of a parent, grief-stricken, panicked parents, tears streaming down their faces, who came hoping to reunite with their children, and many parents did reunite. The children were brought to all of the parents who gathered at the firehouse, and they left with their children until the families realized that those children would not be coming home. I saw those families who lost beautiful young children, and some of them are here, along with adults, dedicated, courageous adults, educators, who sacrificed themselves trying to save their children. And I will never forget the cries of grief, anguish, pain, disbelief. Every parent in his or her DNA has something fundamental. It's about trust and caring for children, making sure that they come home at the end of the day when they go to school, that they are kept safe in some very basic and fundamental way. Society shares that trust. Society failed in that trust. And we will never forget the loss and heartbreak of that tragic day in Sandy Hook. But we also know, in the face of evil, that there was tremendous goodness and heroism. There were genuine heroes. The first responders who braved the unknown, hearing gunfire, charging into that school, stopping the shooting through their courage, because the shooter turned that gun on himself. There were the brave educators, teachers, administrators, school psychologists who threw themselves in front of bullets or tried to save their children and perished themselves. And then members of the community who came together in support of the families and who themselves, along with first responders, are continuing to recover. They exemplify the quintessential values of this quintessential New England town that make us proud to be American. 32 members of the victims' families at the massacre wrote to the United States Senate Judiciary Committee. And through their unspeakable pain and suffering, they asked Congress to honor the memory of their loved ones by supporting measures to stem and stop the epidemic of gun violence. They wrote, and I'm quoting, "In the midst of our anguish, we are compelled to speak out to save others from suffering what we have endured. These brave families have come to Washington to tell their stories. They sat in this very gallery. They met with colleagues. Some of our colleagues refused to meet with them, and I urged them to have some of their courage and meet with them to hear their stories. And we owe them tremendous respect and gratitude. They enabled us to come to this point where we are close to making fundamental changes in the law. But in April, that day of the vote was a day of shame because the Senate turned its back on the families of Newtown while some of them watched in this very gallery, explaining to those families, or trying to explain, how 90% of the American people could be in favor of reasonable, common-sense measures that we propose, background checks on all firearms purchases, and a ban on illegal trafficking and straw purchases, on assault weapons, and on excess capacity magazines. How 90% of the American people could be in favor of those kinds of common-sense measures, most especially the background check, and yet the Senate failed to pass it. Those families have been resolute and resilient at every turn. As Mark Barden wrote, whose son Daniel was killed 6 months ago at Sandy Hook, "We are not defeated. We will always be here because we have no other choice." Despite their profound and harrowing loss, those parents, husbands, wives, sisters, brothers, grandmothers have kept faith, and they have inspired us to keep faith. They've uplifted us, and their determination has meant the world to colleagues who have heard them, and as an example of grace under pressure and courage and strength. They have refused to give up, and they will not give up, nor will we. We are coming back for another vote. We will not allow that vote to be the final one. It may be the first one, but it is not the final one. And we will win the last vote, which is the one that counts. And in the meantime, many of my colleagues have stood up to the special interests, and most especially the NRA, which was used to having its way and holding sway in this body, in Congress, just as a schoolyard bully would. And my colleagues have stood up to that bully once and will do it again. And this time, we will win. What happened in Newtown can happen anywhere in America. If it can happen there, it can happen in any town or city, and it has, in fact, claimed the lives of 4,900 people since Newtown. Gun violence has claimed their lives. And I am constantly shocked and saddened by how quickly that number rises each time I speak about this topic. Just last week, a man armed with a semi-automatic AR-15 assault rifle and more than 1,300 rounds of ammunition opened fire at a Santa Monica college and killed 5 people. The stories about Newtown, about all of the massacres since and before, whether Columbine or Virginia Tech or Arizona and Tucson, all affirm that these laws can help save lives. These laws can help save lives. 6 months ago, I left the firehouse at Sandy Hook to attend a vigil at a church in Newtown. The church was St. Rose of Lima, presided over by Father Bob, Monsignor Robert Weiss. The church was filled. It was a powerful and moving experience. People listened to the service through the windows and the PA system outside. I said that evening, the world is watching Newtown. And in fact, for 6 months, the world has watched Newtown, and it has since seen a story of unparalleled and unprecedented courage and fortitude. And now we will continue to watch Newtown, but the world is also watching the United States Senate. And we need to be worthy of the courage and strength that Newtown has demonstrated in moving ahead. I thank the Majority Leader, Harry Reid, and all of my colleagues who have determined that we will bring this bill back, not only to honor the memories of the Newtown victims and keep faith with them, but also to make this country better and safer, worthy of these children, beautiful and innocent at the time of their passing, all of their future ahead of them, educators who work for their whole professional lives in trying to help children like these young people. Out of that grief and pain, we can make America safer and stronger. We can make America better. That's the potential legacy of these lost lives. A better and safer America, and if we achieve it, they will not have died in vain. Thank you, Madam President, and I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Madam President. I join my colleague from Connecticut here on the floor of the Senate to commemorate a sad, sad day, 6 months since the shootings in Newtown that took 20 little 6- and 7-year-olds and 6 of the teachers that were charged with protecting them. Madam President, I know you share in our sadness because it wasn't too long afterwards that your state went through a tragedy in some ways of smaller and bigger proportions. And you have to wonder, 6 months later, after these families, the brothers and the sisters and the moms and the dads of these victims coming down to the Senate over and over again, including this week, looking senator after senator, congressman after congressman in the eye and asking for this place to learn something from this tragedy, you wonder how 6 months later we've done nothing. You wonder how, if 20 little kids dying at the hands of a madman with a gun over the course of 5 or 10 minutes doesn't move this place to action, what would? What visit to your office, what message, what story, what set of facts could possibly make this place change the laws that have allowed for these slaughters, plural, over and over again to happen? It's 6 months later, and we have done nothing. At least here on the Senate floor, we raised the bill, we put it on for debate. We got 55 votes, and the rules prevented us from getting it passed. The House down the hall has done absolutely nothing, haven't lifted a finger to move legislation forward. 6 months later, and no answer for these families. Madam President, I was there with Senator Blumenthal that afternoon in that firehouse, and those are moments that, I would a lot of days love to have never lived, things that I didn't need to see. But it changed my life, committed me to action, and it commands us to understand that the most shallow argument that has been posed, I would argue the most backwards argument that has been posed over the last 6 months, is that, yes, these terrible things happened, the most terrible of them we're marking the 6-month anniversary of, but there's nothing that we could do here that would really change that. That really bad things are going to happen to good people, to good first-grade students, but that nothing here is going to really change any of that. That is just flat wrong. And it shouldn't be every 6 months that we come to the floor to try to rebut that argument. It should be every day. Because in Columbine, the guns that were bought to slaughter those high school students were bought outside of the background check system. Intentionally so, because the person that bought them knew if they went into a legitimate gun store, they wouldn't be able to purchase the guns that were being requested. And so they went to a gun show around the background checks system. We know different laws would change things because in Aurora, the shooter went in with a 100-round drum, and the shooting stopped and people escaped, including a couple of my constituents, because the gun jammed. They had trouble switching these massive, massive ammunition clips. And in Newtown, we know the power of the gun that was used. I mean, these assault weapons are all over the place today. They've become commonplace, but it doesn't belie the fact that they still have a power to kill that few other guns do. So much so that Adam Lanza walked into that school that day, fired over 150 rounds, shot 20 kids, and not a single one of them survived. Every kid that he shot died, in part because of the power of that gun. That same day, a very sick man walked into a school in China, armed with a weapon, attacked over 20 children, and every single one of them lived. That guy had a knife. Assault weapons, if we continue to allow them to ripple throughout our streets, lead to these mass slaughters. High-capacity ammunition clips, when somebody chooses to engage in one of these massacres, allow more people to be killed. And our failure over and over again to pass comprehensive background checks is unacceptable given the number of criminals and the number of people with severe mental illness who are still allowed to get guns on the internet or in gun shows. 6 months and we've done nothing. But Madam President, I stand here, frankly, more optimistic about human nature than I was 6 months ago, not less optimistic. I might be less optimistic about this place and about the United States Congress, but I'm more optimistic about the indomitable human spirit than I was when this started out. Senator Blumenthal said it best. That 10 minutes of grievous violence, mental illness masquerading as evil inside that school, was essentially enveloped by the millions of acts of humanity that just flowed forth from Newtown, from Connecticut, from all over the country, whether it was the heroism of those teachers, whether it was the firefighters, the volunteer firefighters who stayed at that firehouse for days and weeks on end with no pay, or just the thousands of gifts, teddy bears, of small tokens of appreciation of the community that came from all over the country. People are good. They really are. And despite what that young man did, it reaffirmed my faith in who we are. Last Friday night, the Sandy Hook Fire Department had their big annual fundraiser, and some people wondered whether they would do it. Now, first of all, they said they were going to do it because they weren't going to start changing the way that they did things. And second, They needed the money because they have expended a lot of effort and equipment and resources in responding to this tragedy. Well, on Friday, we had an absolute deluge in New England. It was just raining cats and dogs all day. There was no reason why they should have gone forward on Friday night with that lobster bake at the Sandy Hook Firehouse. It was packed, jammed full of people, not just from Newtown, but from all over New England, who came down on a torrentially rainy evening to show their support for those firefighters, for that community, and for those families. That's what defines Newtown. 6 months later, we know the headlines still read about the 26 kids and adults who lost their lives there. But what we know Newtown to be today is a place full of love, full of compassion, and though not maybe today yet, a place that will, a year, 5 years, 10 years down the line, be defined by resiliency. So, Madam President, I wish we weren't down here commemorating 6 months. I wish we weren't down here commemorating nothing having been done over the course of 6 months. But we are not going away. We are not giving up. The families that were down here this week didn't turn into advocates for 4 months. They turned into advocates for 40 years. And they will be back again and again and again until we have an answer for these mass tragedies and for the 5,033 people who have died at the hands of guns since December 14th, 6 months ago. Mr. President, I yield back the floor.
Who seeks recognition? Who seeks recognition? The senator from Connecticut, pardon?
We would note the absence of a quorum.
Thank you so much. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
The Senate is in a quorum call, so we're waiting for a senator to come to the floor to speak. While we wait, a ceremony to honor Congressman John Dingell, who last week became the longest-serving member in the history of Congress. This event got underway about half an hour ago, and we'll show you as much as we can until a senator comes to the floor to speak.
Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to hand out some glasses for a toast, but first we're honored to have with us a very special guest, a founding member of the world's most famous female trio, the Supremes. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome Miss Mary Wilson.
It's actually dedicated to you because I believe that when you've been in the business as long as we have, you can sing the song. No complaints, no regrets. I still believe in chasing dreams and places Give it all you got. I had my share, I drank my fill, and even though I'm satisfied, I'm hungry still to see what's down another road beyond the hill and do it all again. So here's to life and every joy it brings. So here's to life, to dreamers and the how the time just flies, how love can go forever. And leave you with the memories you left behind to keep your winter warm. Oh, I got it again. Oh, thank you so much. Get the first part. I said you were a great lady. Well, I thank you so very much, sir. It takes one to know one. I've been admired yours for a long time. Thank you. He has great eyes, you know. But there's no yes and yesterday. And who knows what tomorrow brings or takes away. As long as I'm still in the game, I'm gonna play life, and love.
Distinguished senator from Delaware who, as not only an outstanding member of the United States Senate, but as chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, has gone out of his way to understand the issues that we face when we are addressing border security. The chairman was kind enough to visit the border between Arizona and Sonora, Mexico, and spend a lot of time with us and with the people who are entrusted to do so. And he made some remarks that I think were entirely accurate about the challenges we face in enforcing our border. So I again want to thank the distinguished chairman of the Homeland Security Committee. I'd like to address today a few aspects of the issue of comprehensive immigration reform that need to be discussed. First of all, everybody says, and I say it too, we don't want to return to 1986. That in 1986, that we guaranteed the American people that we would secure the border and it would never happen again. Well, the fact is, when we look at what we did in 1986, and I will first of all plead guilty for having voted for it, the only mandate in the entire legislation which gave, quote, amnesty to 3 million people, and I quote, of the amounts authorized must to be appropriated under paragraph 1, sufficient funds shall be available to provide for an increase in the Border Patrol personnel of the Immigration and Naturalization Service so that the average level of such personnel in each of the fiscal years 1987 and 1988 is at least 50% higher than such level for fiscal year 1986. Now let me translate that for it. It meant that we would increase the Border Patrol. That was the only mention of how we were going to secure the border after we gave amnesty in 1986. And at that time, my dear friends, it calls, as I mentioned, well, got to be 50% higher. The Border Patrol has to be 50% higher. Well, do you know what that number was that it had to be higher than? That number of the Border Patrol in 1986 was 4,000. 4,000. Now we have 21,000. So there was really nothing in the 1986 bill about fencing, about sensors, about other ways to get our border secure. And so we learned from that. We learned from that in this legislation that recently passed through the Judiciary Committee, is now on the floor. This bill, as compared with 1986, where they said they would increase the numbers of Border Patrol by 50%, this legislation says it appropriates $3 billion in funding for the comprehensive southern border security strategy. No one who is in RPI status will be able to petition for a green card until requirements are fulfilled. The following: E-Verify and use by all employers, and an entry-exit system in place. $150 billion for additional funding for southern border fencing strategy that has to be submitted within 180 days of passage of this legislation signed by the President. It sets a goal of 90% effectiveness rate for all southern border states. If that goal is not reached within 5 years, there will be a bipartisan commission be formed and authorized to spend $2 billion in additional funds to secure the border. It will add an additional 3,500 Customs and Border Patrol agents. Remember, in 1986, there was a total of 4,000. It will authorize the National Guard to provide assistance along the border if requested. The National Guard has had tremendous success on our border. No, they don't carry weapons, but they do incredibly important work. And I'm glad they don't carry weapons, to tell you the truth. 4 additional Border Patrol stations and forward operating bases. Increase a thing called Operation Stone Garden, which is vital, in my view, in disincentivizing people to be more frequent border crossings. Strengthens the Border Patrol training. It authorizes funds to triple the border crossing prosecutions in the Tucson sector. Why do I mention the Tucson sector? Not because I'm from the state of Arizona, but because the Tucson sector for years has been a major thoroughfare for both people and drugs. It authorizes funds to help states and localities incarcerate criminal, unauthorized illegal immigrants. Grants Department of Homeland Security access to federal lands. That is a problem on our border, where we have an Indian reservation that's right on the border. They are sovereign nations, and this will authorize a greater ability for us to have access to those lands. There are wildlife refuges that we need access to as well. It removes the discretion from the Secretary of Homeland Security to develop the southern border strategy and provide minimum requirements that are recommended by the Border Patrol. Those are the people on the ground. These are the people that today, in 120-degree heat in the Sonora-Arizona border, are sitting in vehicles and patrolling our border to keep our nation secure. This is recommended by them. That must be included in the strategy that we want to achieve and must achieve 100% situational awareness of each and every 1-mile segment of the southern border. The technology list will include, but is not limited to, sector-by-sector requirements, integrated fixed towers, radar systems. These radars track people back from where they came from. Unmanned aerial systems, i.e. what we know of as drones. Fixed cameras, mobile surveillance systems, ground sensors, handheld thermal imaging systems, infrared cameras, thermal imaging cameras, license plate readers, radiation detection systems. All of these are part of this legislation and the billions of dollars that we're going to spend to improve border security, and we all admit that the border is more secure. But where I disagree with the Secretary of Homeland Security is it is not secure enough. So we want to prevent the adjustment of status from RPI, that's registered, the legal status for people who will be granted once the passage of this bill is achieved until that strategy is deployed and operational. Deployed and operational. This is just to achieve a legal status in this country. Remove also a technology list before anybody can adjust from the RPI to green card status. It removes the sole discretion from the Department of Homeland Security to certify the strategy is complete. It requires written third-party certification to the President and Congress that affirms the elements required by the strategy are operational and capable of achieving effective control of the border. With these tools in place, we can achieve situational awareness and be guaranteed this technology is deployed and working along the border. So I say to my friends who say that we are not having sufficient provisions for border security, we will be glad to do more. But let's look at this. Look at what we are doing. Billions of dollars of technology as well as additional people, as long as other measures, including the E-Verify, which is the magnet that draws people to this country, is jobs. And if the word is out that unless an E-Verify is in operation, that unless you can get a job in this country, you're not going to come here. Unless it's through a legal means and not through illegal means, and we are a nation of immigrants. And I'd remind my colleagues again, 40% of the people who are in this country illegally did not cross our border. They came on a visa that expired. So we need to have footprints and other physical evidence of illegal crossing. It's a tool for Border Patrol agents to identify and locate illegal border crossers. But it's imprecise, and that's why we need to have this technology so we can surveil and have situational awareness of the entire border. According to the General Accounting Office, an organization that all of us over time begin to rely on enormously, I quote from them. In terms of collecting data, Border Patrol officials reported that sectors rely on a different mix of cameras, sign cutting, that's tracking footprints, credible sources, and visual observation to identify and report the number of turnbacks and gotaways. Turnbacks are those you catch and turn back, and gotaways are those that you see come across and do not apprehend. According to Border Patrol officials, the ability to obtain accurate or consistent data using these identification sources depends on various factors, such as terrain and weather. For example, data on turnbacks and getaways may be understated in areas with rugged mountains and steep canyons that can hinder detection of illegal entries. In other cases, data may be overstated. For example, in cases where the same turnback identified by a camera is also identified by tracks. Double counting may also occur when agents in one zone record as a gotaway an individual who is apprehended and then reported as an apprehension in another zone. As a result of these data limitations, Border Patrol headquarters officials said that while they consider turnback and gotaway data sufficiently reliable to assess each sector's progress towards border security and to inform sector decisions regarding resource deployment, they do not consider the data sufficiently reliable to compare or externally report results across sectors. That's why we need this technology. Now, Mr. President, I want to point out that from the Border Patrol, not from the Department of Homeland Security, I got a detailed list of what they believe is necessary with using their experience as to the specific equipment and capabilities that they need on each of the 9 sectors of the border. For example, in the Arizona sectors, Yuma and Tucson, we need 50 fixed towers. We need 73 fixed camera systems, 28 mobile surveillance systems, 685 unattended ground sensors, 22 handheld equipment devices, 11 non-intrusive inspection systems, 7 fiber. The list goes on. It is a specific list of what the Border Patrol believes in each of the 9 sectors on our southern border in order to give us 100% situational awareness and put us on the path to a 90% effective control of the border. So I say to my friends who say that we cannot control our border, I respectfully disagree because of what we are doing in this legislation. And those who say that we're unable to keep track of what goes on our border. I would argue that the minimum requirements that to be included in the Southern Border Security Strategy as provided by the Homeland Security, by the Border Patrol is, I think, should convince anyone of what we need. And, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that these minimum requirements be included in the record at this time. Now, I just, for a moment, Mr. President, I see my distinguished friend from Vermont, who's always worth listening to, on the floor, so I will be brief, except that I want to share with our colleagues another aspect of this problem that we really have not talked about very much, and that is the issue of drugs. Drugs are a problem in this country of enormous proportions. I think when you see the effects of illegal drugs such as methamphetamine and others and the devastating effects they have, is doing incredible damage to our nation and particularly to our young people. Now, this is a document, it's called from the Arizona High-Intensity Drug Trafficking Area, the Threat Assessment of 2013. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of the details, but there are some stark facts about the flow of drugs across our southern border that should disturb all of us. And I quote, "In Tucson and Phoenix areas remain the primary distribution hubs for ton quantities of marijuana in the southwest region." Ton quantities of marijuana in the southwest region, as Tucson and Phoenix-based sources sell throughout the United States. In other words, the drugs come up across the Arizona-Sonora border. They are tracked by guides on mountaintops and into Phoenix, and from Phoenix, Arizona, they are distributed throughout the country. The Phoenix Field DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency, Phoenix Fields Division's biannual drug price list for 2012 indicates marijuana prices in the Tucson and Phoenix metropolitan areas remain stable during the period January 2011 to 2012. Why is that important? Because the only real indication as to whether you are reducing a supply is the price of that supply. So when you see that the price of marijuana in the street in Phoenix and Tucson is exactly what it was for the entire year, no matter what you see in the papers and television of these large apprehensions, unless the price is going up, then we are not apprehending these drugs. So I just want to mention a couple of other facts to my colleagues and why we are not, I think, sufficiently in this legislation probably not addressing the drug problem. The retail price of methamphetamine decreased in the Phoenix area and now ranges from $500 to $1,000 per ounce. If there is a terrible drug on the market today, it has to be methamphetamine. I am told that one ingestion of methamphetamine makes one an addict. And so what have we been able to do as far as methamphetamine? The retail price of methamphetamine decreased, which obviously means that it is, the supply is certainly not been impacted. Wholesale black tar heroin prices in Arizona have remained stable or decreased slightly, including market stability. Only 35% of the HIDTA, these are the high-intensity trafficking area, respondents reported high cocaine availability in their respective jurisdictions. Intelligence indicates cocaine price increases in Mexico and Arizona during the past year may have impacted the supply of cocaine to the Arizona drug market, thus impacting other drug markets. So that is good news. The price for a kilogram of cocaine increased $5,000 to $6,000 per kilogram in the Phoenix area. My friends, I know that my colleagues are very busy, but I would at least have your staff read this threat assessment of 2013 in the state of Arizona. And again, I don't say that because I represent the state of Arizona, but these same people, the Drug Enforcement Agency, will tell you still the bulk of illegal drugs crossing our southern border comes through the Arizona-Tucson sector. And so what's my recipe on this situation? Frankly, Mr. President, I don't know a real good recipe, because clearly demand is either on the stable or on the rise in the United States of America, depending on who you talk to. And some places in America, the use of drugs is glamorized. In some places, it's kind of the sophisticated thing to do. I don't think there's any doubt that there are influences in the United States of America that increase the attractiveness of drugs to our citizens. And I'm not saying I know the answer, but I do think that as we address the issue of border security, we have to understand that if there's a demand for drugs in the streets of every major city in America, they'll use ultralights, they'll use submarines, they'll use tunnels, they'll do whatever is necessary in order to get that supply to where there's a market. I'll never forget being down in Colombia where the government people there showed me a submarine that the drug cartel people had built. Very sophisticated submarine. They'd hired engineers to build it. It's one that travels under the water, not far, but under the water. And I said, how much did it cost them to build it? They said, $5 million. I said, $5 million? That's a lot of money. And the guy said, they make $15 million in one load. In one load. So I'm not coming to this floor with a lot of answers, but I am coming to the floor of this Senate and saying that the drug issue in this country is a serious one, and if anybody thinks that we are reducing the supply of those drugs, I think the facts contradict that, and it's time we started seriously as a society addressing what is killing our young and old Americans. So, again, I want to thank my colleagues for their consideration of this legislation. I really came to the floor to convince them that this is a far different situation from 1986. We've gone from 4,000 border agents to 21,000. We have put in all kinds of barriers to the border, but most importantly, as the President, the Senator from Delaware, pointed out earlier today, we now have technology that can surveil and interdict people from crossing our border. Our challenge is to get it done. I thank my colleague from Vermont for his patience, and I yield.
President.
Senator from Vermont.
Thank you. And let me congratulate Senator McCain on all of his hard work with the Gang of Eight and his focus on border security, which is an enormously important issue. Mr. President, as the son of an immigrant, my dad came to this country at the age of 17 from Poland. I strongly support the concept of immigration reform, and I applaud the Judiciary Committee and all of those people who have been working hard